we always need to remember that Madeleine's the one that was taken. Madeleine's the one that we don't know what happened to. Kate and Jerry need to stop making it about themselves, because it makes them look bad, and it makes them look selfish, and it makes them look even worse than their actions made them look. Kate McCann were both practicing doctors back home in Britain, so they decided to bring their very small children, all under the age of 4, with them to Portugal on holiday, as well as their friends, who I believe most of them were also doctors, and their friends' children as well. So the family arrived in Praia da Luz, Portugal on April 28th for their 7-night vacation. They weren't staying at a resort, so to speak, as we know it, more of an apartment complex next to a kind of resort area, next to some restaurants and bars and things. So they actually rented a 2-bedroom ground floor apartment in what was called the Waterside Villages. And the Waterside Villages were right on the perimeter of the Ocean Club, which is where they spent their time during the days, bringing the kids to the kids club. Jerry and Kate had tennis lessons, they would spend time with the kids at the pool, etc. The McCanns went on this vacation with 7 other friends and co-workers. Matthew Oldfield and his wife Rachel, David and Fiona Payne, Diane Webster, Fiona Payne's mother, Russell O'Brien and his partner Jane Tanner. Matthew, Russell, and the Paynes studied medicine together. Also in attendance were the children of the friends, all under the age of 3. During the vacation, the McCanns and their friends had developed a sort of routine for the evenings. They would put their kids to bed, and then they would go to the nearby tapas restaurant to have dinner. And while they were doing this, every 20 to 30 minutes, they would go back and check on their kids.
Most likely scenario that there was no abduction. There's absolutely not a shred of evidence that proves an abduction at all. And the majority of the evidence supports that an accident occurred in the home, and that the body was then removed in an effort to cover up what had happened. That's what the evidence points to, and so I stand by that, and I've been standing by that for many, many years. When you come down to analyzing a case, empathy has nothing to do with it. I've analyzed many cases where I feel very badly for sometimes even the person who committed a serious crime. There were a lot of them and their friends running about. So you always have those initial moments where some certain amounts of evidence may disappear. That happens with every crime, which always makes things more difficult in the future. After that point, as they were doing more investigations, the Portuguese police became suspicious of the statements of the McCanns and their friends because there were things that did not make sense.
They went to Portugal on holiday with their kids and a group of friends that would come to be known as the Tapas 7. Maddie said to them over breakfast, "Why didn't you come last night when Sean and I were crying?"
Went through to have breakfast, and it was at that point that Madeleine said,
I was crying last night.
"Where were you when Sean and I cried last night?"
Stated to her parents that she and her little brother had woken up in the night while they were dining at their tapas restaurant, called for their parents and cried, and nobody had come to get them because their parents were having dinner and drinks. The tapas bar on the other side of the pool.
According to the McCanns and their friends, every half an hour or so, somebody from the group was going to check on their own children.
8:55 p.m. Matt Oldfield went to go check on his children to make sure that everything was okay at 8:55 p.m. And then at 9:05 p.m. Jerry decided to go to the apartment through the unlocked balcony door. Then he glanced into the bedroom and he saw all 3, Madeleine and the 2 twins, sleeping. Jerry actually saw one of his friends, I guess it was at the resort. It wasn't part of the Tapas 9, it was like just a person that he had met while they were staying there. His name was Jeremy Wilkins. 2 men spent several minutes talking, and actually at 9:10 p.m. Jane Tanner went to go check on her own children. She saw Jerry and Jeremy conversing. However, they didn't see her, which is once again also kind of like a weird thing because the street was quite narrow, so it's just kind of random that they didn't notice. But at 10 p.m. is when Kate decided to actually check on the children. It
was 10 p.m. when Kate made that final journey back to the apartment. It was her turn to go and check on the kids.
She looked in the room and noticed that the window was open and that Madeleine was gone. First, Kate claims that she checked her room and didn't see Madeleine anywhere, so she ran back to the tapas bar, leaving the two twins in their room alone, screaming, "They've taken her, they've taken her." She was kidnapped, and left her children in like this same apartment where her other child was just taken from. Saying that they spent so much time on that, but little time on the fact that an Irish family saw a man holding a, once again, little blonde girl with pink pajamas headed towards the beach that same night as well. And they actually had like a sketch artist sketch them in like 2006, and it wasn't even released till 2013, but the sketch kind of looks similar to Jerry in my opinion. But apparently the family claimed that it was Jerry. Like they saw a picture of Jerry and they were like, yeah, I'm like 80% sure that was him. Quite evidential towards the McCanns being a suspect. In fact, this made them quite a big suspect. And the dog who can sense blood actually sensed blood in Kate's clothing and some of Madeleine's toys, which is really terrifying. Like I said, this made the McCanns look extremely guilty. They might have been like, oh crap, like we really have to make sure these kids are sleeping like properly, so maybe giving them sleeping medication would help. Her parents were doctors there. The way the parents have acted is so weird. The parents have been proven to be kind of irresponsible, but that also proves the other Tapas 9 parents to be irresponsible as well, because very known at the Tapas restaurant that they wanted to sit in this particular table so that they can view their apartment with their sleeping children. It was known at the like front desk of the restaurant.
During the vacation, the McCanns and their friends had developed a sort of routine for the evenings. They would put their kids to bed and then they would go to the nearby Tapas restaurant to have dinner, and while they were doing this, they would go back and check on their kids.
One of those questions that kind of throws you.
Madeleine had been waking up nights before, the night that their upstairs neighbor heard her crying, the night before she went missing, where she told Kate and Jerry that she'd cried for them.
Actually, we go out tonight, we just need to make sure we're really checking. We wouldn't like to think they might wake up, be crying and looking for us.
The PJ files showed that the upstairs neighbor of the McCanns in their apartment in Portugal, Pamela Fenn, she claims a couple nights before Maddie went missing, she heard Maddie crying in the apartment below her for hours. So she says Maddie was crying, calling for her father from 10 p.m. to 11:45 p.m. until she finally heard the door open and her parents come home and she stopped crying. Kate and Jerry and the Tapas 7, they claim they were going back every 20 to 30 minutes to check on their children. Yet we find out that Madeleine, only a couple of days before she goes missing, was crying for almost 2 hours and nobody came to check up on them at that time. Were they really checking in on them as often as they said they were? So Sean, Emily, and Maddie were all under the age of 4. You leave your very, very small children in a foreign country, in a place they won't recognize if they wake up. It's not home, it's not their own bed. And then you leave the sliding glass door to the apartment unlocked. And like I said, this was not a gated resort. This wasn't a place where there was only, all of them would leave their kids alone and unattended in the apartment. And they said they didn't think there was anything wrong with this because they were sleeping.
30 p.m. the Tapas 9 all arrived at the restaurant. 8:55 p.m. Matt Oldfield went to go check on his children to make sure that everything was okay at 8:55 p.m. and then at 9:05 p.m. Jerry decided to go to the apartment through the unlocked balcony door.
And that would be the last time that he would see his daughter. What's the big deal? They're safe, they're sleeping, and they went back and checked on them. Evening at 8:30, the McCanns and their friends had this standing reservation with this specific table at the Tapas bar, which has also come under a microscope because every evening, like I said, the McCanns and their friends would meet at this Tapas bar for dinner at 8:30, and because the McCanns were very, very clear about why they wanted this specific table in the Tapas bar, because they could still see the apartment building from this table. It wasn't as close as they would have you believe. In fact, I think it was like a 5 to 7 minute walk from the Tapas bar back to the apartment, especially if you went up the street and through the front door instead of through the pool area and then through the back door. So as you can see, the star in the upper top right-hand corner of the picture shows the Tapas bar where the McCanns and their friends would dine every night, and then the star in the bottom left-hand corner of the picture, that shows the McCann's apartment 5A, which doesn't even face the pool side where the tapas bar would be visible from the apartment and vice versa. And they would have had to walk right out of the tapas bar and then take a left onto the street and then walk all the way up the street and around the apartment building in order to enter and see apartment 5A. And they would tell, all the serving staff that we need this table because our kids are alone in our apartment and we just want to keep an eye on things.
It's well known that we were dining at the tapas bar 50 yards away.
So they were not, shy about letting anybody really know what was happening. Anybody who worked in that restaurant or talked to somebody who worked in that restaurant would know that there was small children left alone in this apartment building and how often the parents went back to check on them.
We were making regular checks. We were going into the apartment, always quiet, every night.
I find it incredibly irresponsible, and why they were never held accountable or responsible for this.
I just couldn't understand why they wouldn't have hired a babysitter, left the sliding screen door unlocked, but apparently the front door just made too much sound. They were afraid it would wake up the children, so that when they went to check on the kids, they could just go in and out easily, and you can't lock a screen door from the outside.
At around 9:10, Jane Tanner actually claims she passed the two men on the road while she was going to check on her kids. She saw them, but they don't ever recall seeing her. And also, as she was walking up the street, somebody crossed. She saw this man walking past, holding a small child in his arms, a blonde child with pink pajamas on, and she just remembers at that moment thinking, oh, that child doesn't have any socks on or shoes. She kind of just went out of her way to make a point of making it seem like this man was not a tourist, but was a local or a foreigner.
Sketchy appears to be carrying the child in a sort of unusual way.
Yeah, I was carrying sort of across the body like that. I suppose in hindsight you probably think somebody would carry them more against.
So at 9:30 this should have been Kate's turn to go check on the kids, but she didn't. Both Matthew and Russell were getting up at that moment to check on their children. So Matthew offered to check on Maddie and the twins while he was checking on his kids. He claims he went in the McCann's apartment and he actually, opened the door to the bedroom and looked in, and he does say that he saw Sean and Emily, but he doesn't recall seeing Madeleine. He just said he kind of assumed she was there, which would change the timeline of this whole evening much more dramatically, especially when considering the couple hours after a disappearance or a kidnapping are the most crucial. And on 10 p.m., Kate finally does go for her check. Now remember, at this point, 10 p.m., this is 2.5 hours since she's checked on her children or seen her children. Jerry has gone back and checked once, and their friend Matthew Oldfield has checked once for them, allegedly. So she claims they left the windows all closed and locked up. So she opened the door, saw the window was open, and then saw that Maddie was not there. First, she leaves the apartment, leaves her two other children still sleeping there. She leaves them sleeping there. She runs back to the tapas bar and frantically and panically tells her friends Maddie's been taken. They've taken her. Number one, how do you know she's been taken? I mean, she could have wandered off. She could have gotten up. She could be in the bathroom. She could have left the apartment looking for her parents. She could be hiding somewhere, messing around. How do you know? Kate, why would you leave your two other children in the apartment that your daughter has just been kidnapped from and run back to the tapas bar? That's the McCanns and the Tapas 7, or Tapas 9 if you include Jerry and Kate. That's the Tapas 9 account of what happened that evening. Why didn't the McCanns leave them with family members at home back in the UK if they wanted to basically just hang out and play tennis all day and then eat dinner and drinks with their friends at night? Why wouldn't they have taken advantage of the evening daycare that they offered at the Ocean Club? It was, a little bit more money and they would have had to pay for it, but why wouldn't they take advantage of that? They were both doctors, they were physicians. Traveling in Portugal is not cheap. They had money that a family vacation and an adult vacation vacation are completely different. We know that when we go on a family vacation and we bring the kids, it's gonna be a lot of work, but we're going to spend time with our kids. You're not there to kind of shove them off on babysitters all day and then leave them alone and unattended. The police took fingerprints off the window, and the only fingerprints they found on the window were Kate McCann's. No damage to the window was ever done, so why did the McCanns tell all their family members that there had been damage done to the window? In her first account of the sighting, she doesn't really know what the man's carrying. She says maybe it's a bundle, maybe it was a kid, I don't know. She doesn't remember what he was wearing really. She doesn't know. Her second retelling of the events become much clearer, which we know is the opposite of the way the memory works. As we get further away from an event, we actually remember things less clearly. But not Jane Tanner. She remembered things more clearly. Do something stupid. Clarence Mitchell comes in and fixes it. So why, when their daughter goes missing, their baby daughter, their 3-year-old innocent little daughter, do the McCanns feel it necessary to hire a PR person? Then once the McCanns, started looking not so great to the public eye, this millionaire benefactor backed out. He was like, I don't have anything to do with this. And the Madeleine McCann Fund continued to pay for Clarence Mitchell's high salary. Kate was taken in for questioning, and for some reason they allowed Jerry to be in the room with her whenever she was questioned, and he would sit behind her and always have his hand on her shoulder. And she was questioned. She was asked, I think, something like 49 questions, and she refused to answer 48 of them. July 22nd, 2008, the 57-page Portuguese police report was leaked online. This conveniently happened the day after the Portuguese authorities had shelved the Madeleine McCann case to make them look bad, and I do believe it was leaked on purpose, but I don't think it was to make them look bad. They looked bad without that report being leaked. I think it was basically to get the truth out. They did a pretty good job investigating the case, given the fact that they were, working with false information the McCanns provided, and a botched timeline, in my opinion, that was not an accurate timeline of how things went down. The PJ didn't know they were working with a crime scene at that point. For all they knew, they were just really concerned with finding Maddie, not trying to figure out what happened in the apartment. A couple of hours after a person goes missing, especially a young child, are the most crucial. Typically, if somebody kidnaps a young child for nefarious reasons, they are killing them within the first 3 hours of having them. So they really were more concerned with finding Maddie, which they put a lot of effort, time, and manpower into doing that. They set up control posts on the roads and the border of Spain. They brought in sniffer dogs, as well as search and rescue teams, both aerial and maritime, which basically means they had helicopters flying and they had boats looking. So they were covering it from land, air, and sea. 100 officers from surrounding areas worked 24 hours a day, and they had regular meetings and follow-ups with each other and with the family. It's clear that the PJ, to me, they spared no expense in manpower and money and time. She wasn't at the apartment anymore. Their main concern was finding this little girl.
In the majority of cases where very young children go missing and are later found dead, the family is involved. It said police were suspicious of her parents' involvement. The article in the weekly paper Sol said the McCanns and their friends were thought to be hiding something. In the car, the scientists have also found a second full match, and police say that is the most damning evidence that's been returned by these forensic test results. The dogs, the forensic tests that followed, that was the turning point, wasn't it?
It was the turning point for the arrests, yes.
So we've got the master bedroom, Kate and Jerry's bedroom. We've got behind a blue couch in the living room, Cuddle Cat, Madeleine's t-shirt, and Kate's clothes as well. So Keela, the dog who smells the blood and senses the blood, she also alerted behind that blue couch in the living room. The dogs, Eddie and Keela, alerted to the McCann's rental car. Now, both dogs, the dog that smells dead bodies and the dog that smells blood, alerted to their rental car to say that there had been at one point a dead body in that car and blood in that car.
The police then became concerned that the McCanns may be involved in what happened to their child. When they went to question the McCanns, Kate refused to answer any of the questions, and following that, they left Portugal. And the case was shelved at that point because they were no longer there, and neither were their friends. And so at that point, they did not have enough evidence to go further. But as the Supreme Court recently said, which very much upset the McCanns, because what has been touted for many, many years, especially in the media, is that the McCanns were cleared. They were not suspects. That is not true. The Portuguese Supreme Court said very clearly they have not been cleared. They at this point, they have not been cleared. And they shouldn't have been cleared. And when Scotland Yard came in to do the review, one of the most bizarre and egregious things that came out of that was when they started the review, they started with the premise that it was an abduction and the McCanns were not involved in any way. Well, I have never seen somebody do a review of a case and not review the evidence and to start with a supposition when you do, for example, statement analysis. You can always say, oh, people say things in all kinds of different ways. Not exactly true. Statement analysis will prove that most people say things in exactly the same way, and you can learn a lot from their statements. You can learn a lot from their behaviors. Behaving in a way that is abnormal and making statements that are red flags. And then early on in the investigation, one of the statements from the friends was that Jane Tanner, one of the McCann's friends who they were dining with, came back toward the holiday flat, and she saw a man walking across the street from the flat with a little girl in his arms. And at the same time, Jerry McCann was standing on the street talking to a friend named Jez. She passed by them. Oddly enough, they never saw her. They also never saw the man carrying the child. Now, I've been there to Portugal, and I've been on that street. And let me tell you, it's a very narrow street, a very incredibly quiet street at night. There's no way she could have passed them and they did not see her.
Kate refusing to answer those 48 or 49 questions. You know who doesn't answer questions? Somebody who's pleading the fifth. You know why you would plead the fifth? To not incriminate yourself. So why would you as a mother not answer questions the police are asking you so that they can help find your missing daughter? The Portuguese Police Department instructed the McCanns to not tell the media about Maddie's eye defect. So it's like the strip of brown in one of her eyes. And they said don't tell the media about that because if somebody has taken her and they find that she has such a really rare kind of distinguishable characteristic, the person who took Maddie might kill her because they have more of a chance of being found. And Jerry themselves and how they don't act like the parents of a child who has been abducted. Smelling it and she said it smelled like Madeleine. When Kate McCann found out that sniffer dogs were going to be coming to her home or her apartment in Portugal, she washed Cuddle Cat. She washed Cuddle Cat and she said it was because Cuddle Cat was dirty and there was a smell of sunscreen on him and she wanted to wash him. And I just don't see, if you want your daughter to be found, why you wouldn't give the truth, because that's the best way to help your daughter become found. But they, wanted to change their stories and lie. And then they didn't take part in the recreation of the event. So the McCanns or any of their friends in the Tapa 7, they never came back to Portugal when asked by the police department because they wanted to create a recreation, hoping to figure something else out or get another lead on how to find Madeleine, but they didn't want to do that. And the Madeleine McCann Fund was basically a public fund set up by the McCanns for people to donate money to so that they could help find Maddie. It would help cover expenses. And it's something like 11 million pounds or something has been spent of, donations to the McCanns, who are not poor people. And the McCanns then decided what to do with this money. He wrote this book stating his theory that he believes Madeleine died in the apartment, probably accidentally, that her parents covered it up and made up this whole kidnapping story so that they wouldn't look bad or get in trouble or go to jail. They sued him for libel and then, they won, but then later that decision was reversed and now he's basically suing them. That money in the Madeleine McCann Fund went towards court fees for all the people that the McCanns have sued and all the people that have sued the McCanns. Basically, that's what it's been paying for. So a donation to the Madeleine McCann Trust is a donation to help keep her parents out of prison. Clement Freud, he's the grandson of famous psychiatrist Sigmund Freud, accused of being a pedophile and a rapist. In 2016, 7 years after he died, many women came out saying that Clement Freud had abused them and, even gone so far as to rape some of them in his many years in power in the British government, and many of these girls were underage. Because Vicky Haynes, one of the girls who was abused by Fred when she was just 14 years old, she's in her 60s now, but she strongly believed that he was connected. For one, he owned and lived in a secluded villa in the Algarve resort of Praia da Luz, a few hundred yards away from the Ocean Club where Madeleine and her family was staying and where Madeleine disappeared from. Clement Freud had Kate and Jerry to his villa about 2 months after Maddie went missing for lunch, a visit that Kate McCann recalls fondly in her book about her missing daughter. The McCanns say they received a letter at the beginning of July from Freud saying he was ashamed about how the media was treating them and how the Portuguese police department was treating them and intruding in their lives, and he basically said, you know, I own a home right around the corner from you, would you like to come? So why did a man who kept himself isolated and kind of apart from everybody in the area that he was living in Portugal, why did he suddenly feel like he wanted to reach out? And he kept himself apart from locals and tourists, so he wasn't really like friendly, he wasn't open, he didn't invite people over. Actually, a lot of the people who lived near him never report even seeing him. 2 strangers that he never met into his home and have lunch with them, and then, you know, develop a friendship with them and kind of involve himself in their lives after. So Clement went back to Britain, but he stayed in touch via email with the McCanns, and he returned at the end of August. A few days after he returned, the McCanns were named Arguidos, and then he reached out to them again to have them back over to his house, this time later in the evening, like 10 o'clock in the evening. So he's making fun of the media's coverage of Kate. So after he says this, Kate, you know, says like, that's just what she needed, you know, someone to make things seem a little less worse than they were. So first of all, his comments are just ew. So if you come up to me and you make a joke about the investigation that's trying to figure out what happened to my missing daughter, I'm going to punch you in your face. So why Kate thought that this was like cute or funny, I don't know. Secondly, why does Kate want everything to be a little less terrible? It is terrible. This is terrible. Your baby girl is missing. You don't know what's happened to her. And Kate and Jerry are just like having lunch with Clement Freud and, you know, having brandy and telling stories and making fun of the case, the investigation that's trying to find their daughters. Some people think that the sketches look like John and Tony Podesta. John and Tony Podesta are, you know, politicians in Washington, D.C. And John and Tony Podesta were actually friends with Clement Freud and had been rumored to have stayed with him before. And some people even say that they were staying there. I asked Jerry at one point, like, do you ever wonder what's happening to her? And he said yes. And she said, I just imagine her perfect little genitals like destroyed. So I didn't even want to say it, like it creeped me out to say it, but that's what she said. That is what she says about her 3-year-old daughter. And that's what she's thinking about apparently while her daughter's missing. So that is disturbing.
The amount of cell site data has been gathered. There is no evidence to indicate that the data has been fully investigated or analysed. How vital to the original police investigation would that have been? A more thorough analysis of the mobile phone data?
It could have been very helpful indeed. It's, you know, mobile phone traffic analysis is vital to many investigations these days.
Scotland Yard had 4 suspects. They were linked by their use of mobile phones, their backgrounds and their location on the night Madeleine disappeared. The Metropolitan Police asked the Portuguese to invite them and others to be interviewed in 2014. The 4 were questioned and made arguidos, suspects. Were interrogated by Portuguese police with questions supplied by Scotland Yard.
We had some descriptions to work with, and that led to us identifying a group of people who it was worth pursuing. We did lots of searches, we worked with the Portuguese, they were spoken to, and we pretty much closed off that group of people.
A former Ocean Club waiter was identified by Portuguese police as a suspect for the sex attacks and possibly for Madeleine's abduction. On young sleeping children at resorts along the coast. There were 3 here at Albufeira, 2 at Carvoeiro and another at Silves.
We thought at the time that there were enough reasons for us to believe that this could have been the work of one person.
There's another person involved in this, and his name's Robert Murat. He was the PJ's first suspect, And here's why. So Robert Murat was an expat who lived in his mother's house about 150 yards away from the Ocean Club Resort. The PJ had briefly signed him on as an interpreter to help with the McCanns in the first days after Madeleine went missing, and I guess he had volunteered for that job, so he obviously spoke both Spanish and English so he could help them understand what the Portuguese police were saying and vice versa. On May 8th, the police received a call from an anonymous caller. She was a woman who didn't want her identity revealed, wouldn't even tell the police who she was, but she said there was a man and he was involved in Madeleine's disappearance and he would know how to keep it quiet since he had friends in the government and in the police department, and basically she said he was responsible for Mandy's disappearance. She said he lived close to the Ocean Club at his mother's house. She said he had an English-speaking mother, and she said he was very close to the case, and then she did say that this person was Robert Murat.
On the 11th day, police formally questioned Robert Murat, apparently on little more than a journalist's warning about his odd behaviour. He was later cleared of all suspicion.
Murat had made himself available to the McCanns as an interpreter. He put himself out there for them, but he was really weird about being photographed. Anytime the media would get close to him and try to take his picture, we would freak out. He didn't want to be photographed. He said he had a wife and a daughter back in the UK, and he was going through like a really nasty divorce, and he just didn't want his picture in the media or out there, which I guess makes sense, but not really. If you're just helping a family find a missing girl, why would it affect your divorce or your family in any way to have yourself photographed? Unless she didn't know he was in Portugal. I don't know what the deal was with that, but in this case, like trying to read confidential documents, asking a bunch of questions about like what the police thought about the case, and maybe it was this, you know, putting up theories to the police, like maybe it could have been this, or have you checked into this, like acting really involved in the case. And I kind of get that from a person who really is interested in true crime. Like if I was involved on the cusp of a true crime case, I would have things to say and I would want to know as much information as possible.
Robert Murat was helping the police as a translator. He's an expat. He was living at the time 150 yards up the street.
Historically, people who have kind of inserted themselves into the centre stage in investigations have been viewed with some suspicion by the police, and rightly so in some cases.
The next morning when he was released, he wouldn't appear on camera, but he told me that he was innocent. He said that he felt he was being made a scapegoat, and his real fear was that this was going to ruin his life. And of course he was eventually let go with no further action.
Then our best friend Jane Tanner, safely in a police van with the windows tinted, did point out Robert Murat as being the man that she saw carrying away the child that night. You know, the Tanner sighting, which has since been completely refuted, and the real person who it was came forward. So she was sitting in the police van and they saw Robert and they were like, is that him? And she was like, yes. So this feels more like a Top is 9 kind of like fallout guy. I feel like they set him up to take the fall completely, because the first time anybody heard about this guy besides the anonymous caller was a British reporter. She told her supervisor that there was a man in Portugal acting really weird about the McCann case and like asking questions, and she brought this to his attention, and that woman ended up being a friend of Clarence Mitchell. So they knew each other very well. They both worked in the media, and so she knew Clarence Mitchell, and she's the first one that pointed out Robert might be suspicious. And then this anonymous caller, also like anonymous, we have no reason or proof to back this up, and then Jane Tanner. So the three strikes against Robert were a friend of Clarence Mitchell, a person who didn't want their identity revealed, and Jane Tanner, who we know doesn't know what she's talking about and just pretty much makes things up. Robert Murat has since sued for libel, and he won. So, you know, they dismissed him as a suspect. He wasn't looked into again, and he won a case basically for defamation, saying this ruined his life. You know, it was really tough for him. Like, they questioned everybody he knew. They put him under a microscope. They plastered his face all over the TV, basically saying that he had something to do with her disappearance. And if he didn't, I can see how that would have really caused turmoil in his life. So could it be that he had something to do with her disappearance? It's possible. It's possible anybody could have had something to do with her disappearance. The legal system didn't think so. People speculated that maybe she had gotten up again in the night, seen that her parents weren't missing, knew that they were out having dinner or what have you, and she had left the apartment of her own free will to kind of look for them. That is possible. I mean, she was 3, almost 4 years old. Maybe she had the presence of mind to leave the apartment to look for her parents. Small child wandering around the streets, I feel like that would have been something that somebody, once again, would have noticed. Somebody walking around would have seen, you know, a little girl just wandering around looking for her parents. Is it possible that as she was wandering around looking for her parents, somebody with bad intentions did grab her and kidnap her? Is that Madeleine died that night in the apartment, possibly from an accident, most likely from an accident, and her parents found that she had died when they came back to check on her, or whatever. At some time they figured out she had died, and because they didn't want to get in trouble, they covered it up and they made up the story about a kidnapping, and they kind of kept pushing this narrative, and that's why they were not willing to look into any other theories or give any credence to what anybody else had to say if it didn't support the kidnapping narrative. So could Maddie have gotten up during the night, maybe fallen and hit her head? And that could be why the blood-sniffing dog, Gila, smelled blood. A lot of people believe that the McCanns drugged their children to keep them sleeping at night, sedated. Her parents were both doctors, so they would have access to that kind of medication. And the twins were asleep through everything. So the door slamming, allegedly, when Kate went into the bedroom. People coming in the apartment, you know, looking for Maddie, screaming her name, freaking out the apartment, police coming in, all this stuff. Emily and Sean never woke up. Reports are even that they were handled by all sorts of different people, and they slept through the entire thing. Now, I have a 20-month-old. Literally, she will wake up if I use the ice machine in the kitchen. Any young children that sleep like that through that commotion, unless they are sedated in some way. This theory could be supported by the fact that the cadaver and the blood sensing dogs did pick up the scent of death and blood in the McCann's apartment as well as in their vehicle. So some people believe that Maddie had died and they kind of put her body somewhere until the heat was off. A couple weeks later, they rented a car and they moved her body to a safer place. Is that they are irresponsible parents? I think they were kind of selfish. They're the kind of parents who, you know, kind of want to keep having a social life but have kids as well. They want to do what they want to do, but they also want to have a family. And anybody who's a parent knows when you have kids, everything changes. Like, it's not about you anymore, and you stop going out and you don't have as many close friendships because you can't do the things that your friends are doing because you have children.
We have always tried to do that, is to keep time for ourselves.
The kids have to come first, but I don't think Kate and Jerry really ever wanted to make that sacrifice. I think they thought they could have their cake and eat it too. They could have a family and they could still have this flourishing social life where they were hanging out with their friends, drinking, and you can't do that. So if Maddie had accidentally died, especially if it was because of them sedating her so that she would sleep, would they have covered it up? I 100% believe they would have, because think about it. If she was discovered to have died accidentally or otherwise on their watch when they were literally not there, so off their watch, not only would they be charged with child neglect, they would lose their jobs, their medical licenses, they would lose their other 2 kids, they would lose everything. They might even go to prison, especially if it was found that she had been drugged. They would definitely go to prison. They would lose everything. So they might have been thinking, as selfish and narcissistic people do, like, well, Maddie's already dead. We can't do anything to help her, but we can help ourselves right now, right? We can help ourselves. And they probably justified it by saying, you know, Emily and Sean still need their parents with them. You know, Maddie's dead. We can't help that. We can't change that, but we still need to be here for these other 2 kids. So we have to find a way to hide what really happened and build an entirely different story about where Maddie is. I do believe that the McCanns know more than they're saying, and if they knew Maddie was dead, this would kind of reinforce the way that they were acting after.
Before you even begin. When I've reviewed cold cases for police departments, I walk in and sometimes even the police will say, well, here's what happened. I'll go, no. I'm not here to hear your story. I'm here to examine the evidence from the beginning. They should have said, we have no conclusions at this point. We do not know what happened to Madeleine. We do not know whether she was abducted or there was an accident, or we don't know. We don't know if the McCanns were involved, if they weren't. because we have not examined the evidence yet. When they got there and started examining the evidence, if they could exclude the McCanns along the way and have proof to exclude the McCanns, then they could do so. But they excluded the McCanns before they started the investigation. And they started with a premise. It was actual remit that this is an abduction. We're going to investigate it as an abduction. And I've never seen anything like that. Now they've spent, what is it now? In U.S. dollars, it's $18 million in 6 years, achieving absolutely nothing. They had not one clue. The McCanns were totally for this. This is the person that took our child. This is the person that took our child. Yet just a short time later, the Smith family saw a man walking toward the beach from the direction of that holiday flat, from the direction of McCann's flat. They saw someone carrying that child toward the beach. That entire family saw this. Yet the McCanns did not want to recognize that person as a possible abductor. Tell you everybody, as they'll say, check this person out, check that person out, check out the mailman, check out the milkman. You know, they think everybody did it because they don't want to give up one possible shred of a lead and say, oh, it could only be Jane Tanner. Well, there's a good reason for that. Jane Tanner gives Jerry McCann an alibi, and that's a concern. Later on, it was proven that if she did see that man, it certainly wasn't an abductor. So therefore, that leaves us with a Smith sighting.